Welcome to Catalyst and CMF's renewed culture of innovation. Makers on Screen. I'm your host, Doug Webster, and today's show is Crowdsourcing, bringing together minds and talent to make. The emerging maker movement has inspired many to pursue design, development, and production of new products that are exciting, utilize open source technologies, and help make our world a better place. With the onset of open source, crowdsourcing of ideas, talent, and support is becoming more and more mainstream. And my guest today, who knows all about crowdsourcing, is Kyle Clark. He's a founder of Design Book, which is an emerging crowdsource management company. Welcome to the show, Kyle.
Thank you, Doug. It's great to be here.
Great. Well, can you tell us, first of all, what is crowdsourcing?
Crowdsourcing is the open solicitation to a crowd, generally via the internet, for a predefined task. And that task could range from something that's intellectual in nature, a social connection, or real labor. And crowdfunding is a type of crowdsourcing.
Okay. So why would you crowdsource an innovative project?
Crowdsourcing a project per se involves generally a lot of people, and technical projects right now require a lot of different skills.
Yeah.
The days of having two brothers in a garage in Ohio developing a new type of aircraft have long since passed. Projects are mechatronic in nature. They require mechanical design, electrical, thermodynamic design, controls, and they all merge together. To start a business on this technical project, you require people that are versed in marketing and versed in business development. So to bring all those people together and have a successful technical product launch, crowdsourcing is a natural vehicle to do that.
So it's hard to be all things to all people.
Precisely.
Yeah. So by doing this, you're able to attract talent and expertise from all over the place, especially through the internet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, what types of projects make sense to crowdsource?
Well, building on that, the more complex the project, the more likely it's going to need a diverse set of skills. But what's interesting about crowdsourcing and crowdfunding is that projects that people can get behind and get passionate about, we believe that you find amazing dedication and passions. So if you find a project that people can understand and comprehend, contrast a tangible thing like a quadcopter or an airplane, something that people get passionate and exciting about, a boat, versus something like a wafer holding chuck for IBM. The former of those would be much better fit for crowdsourcing because people can understand it. So that's criteria number one. Number two, it needs to require a team of people to execute on the project. If it's as simple as just marketing something that's a quarter turn adjustment from something else, it doesn't really suit itself to crowdsourcing because it's not complex enough, and you don't really need the crowd to apply this.
Yeah.
Number three, the founder has to be willing to utilize the sharing economy, the open source economy, to execute on that project. And if you have all of those elements, you end up with a really good foundation for crowdsourcing a technological, complex, innovative project.
Now, when it comes to innovative businesses, how does that work? Why is crowdsourcing important?
There's a couple challenges with crowdsourcing in innovation and technology around IP protection, around speed to market issues.
Yeah.
But when it comes to doing truly innovative projects, bringing a crowd together to get a second, third, fourth, 10th set of eyes on a particular problem will generally accelerate that project at a much faster rate than a traditional skunkworks style thing where you have a closed team of people who are protective with their ideas. So it works in both directions. Protection of IP, but also that open innovation drives a much higher acceleration and pace of innovation.
Okay. So how does that work in a business environment? You normally have your your employees in your business, those are your experts. And then if you're doing crowdsourcing, how does that typically work for businesses, and how receptive are they to that?
Well, in the case of a small business where a lot of technology is being developed right now, it enables those small businesses to compete with the Raytheons and the Boeings and the Lockheeds, who have 300-400 person development teams in buildings with subject matter experts in each field. As a small business, typically you have a just as diverse of a set of requirements for your human resources, but you certainly don't have the bandwidth to employ a thermodynamicist, a fluid mechanics person, a mechanical structural engineer, all on the same project. But the reality is those people are out there, and they're willing and able to support your development. So how does it work? You as a startup business with a core technology, put out to the crowd a description of what you're trying to develop. And we'll talk about this a little bit, I think, when we get to IP. But you put out enough for people to understand what you're trying to accomplish, what the end game is, maybe what the problem and the solution is. Very simply, a couple sentences. People get engaged and excited about it. And with the Web 2.0, 3.0 now, we can use things like videos and bidirectional rating systems, forums, to generate that momentum around the project. Once you get the people excited about it, there's a method of exchanging this social, intellectual, or experiential capital, that human resource, for something that the business has. And it could be a reward, for example. It could be a piece of the product. It could be equity in the product, or it could be money. And that open solicitation to the crowd, the ability to pull them into that project, and then execute on that deliverable in open transparency with clear expectations, are the basic mechanics to enable crowdsourcing.
Okay, great. Well, as far as crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, we'll take a look at a couple slides. The first one, if you can bring it up, Jim, is crowdsourcing. If you want to explain what these are about once I get them up there.
Yeah. So crowdsourcing is the exchange of this intellectual, social, and experiential capital that we talked about before. There's arguments, 7, 10, 12 forms of capital. These are the ones we focus on in our crowdsourcing world. The intellectual capital, such as an expertise, a social capital, maybe a book of connections if you are if you're a matchmaker, and of course that experiential or human capital element of crowdsourcing. Those need to be exchanged for something tangible, potentially equity in the business, a reward. And what it does is it enables these distributed teams that are generally remote and generally solicited through the internet to work towards a common vision. And what that really does, if you think about capital being outside of the monetary form of capital, it allows you to really democratize the access to that capital, where previously that was really isolated to those big businesses that could fund large Oxford groups or large masses of engineers and technologists within their own business to have that same reach. So it democratizes that small business to get access to those expertise. So crowdsourcing really defines that exchange of capital.
Jim, can you go and pull up the crowdfunding slide if you want to continue talking about that?
Crowdfunding is one form of crowdsourcing. And really there are 4 types of crowdfunding. There's a debt crowdfunding, like Prosper and Lending Club. There is rewards crowdfunding, like Indiegogo or Kickstarter. There's a donation-based crowdfunding, which has been going on for many years with nonprofits. And then there's equity crowdfunding. Now, the average raise size of these different forms of crowdfunding range from something in the $2,000 to $5,000 range for rewards, all the way up to $190,000 average raise for equity. And the return on the investment is interesting because the investor involved in a rewards campaign typically does it because they know the people and they want to participate in that. When you need to raise substantially higher amounts of money, the motivations shift a little bit. They still are led by the people and the participation, but you add the profit to that. And equity crowdfunding gives the investor an opportunity to profit when the business profits. A great example of that is Oculus Rift, where the founders of Oculus Rift went to Kickstarter. They raised over $3 million on Kickstarter, and about 17,000 of those dollars came through as in the form of donations. And then they went on to sell to Facebook last March for a few $billion. And those initial investors weren't really investors. They were just the fans. And they gave them a little bit of money, and they went off and they profited grossly from this. And those investors didn't get anything. Now, if that were an equity play and those investors held securities in that investment, it would have been much more interesting, right? It doesn't happen very often, but that potential exists in a lot of startup technology businesses. And equity crowdfunding gives that opportunity to the investors.
Okay, cool. So in what way does crowdsourcing allow for accelerated business growth?
The
exponential growth.
Exponential growth, yes. Yeah. Exponential organizations are not going to be formed with finite labor pools, bricks and mortar construction to host those labor pools. In the technology space, there's just a lot going on at the same time across the entire world. To get an edge on that, you can't be held back by the traditional development cycle of adding resources to get a particular task done, finding a new resource, getting the next task done. Even if it's done through the freelance economy, it makes it quite difficult. In a less than traditional environment, a startup business will go out and find money. Startup business starts with some equity. He owns 100% of his business. He goes out and he gives up 15% of his business to get $100,000. That transaction costs money. It's not frictionless. The seller or the issuer has to have an attorney. The investor has attorneys and CPAs review all of this. At the end of the day, you could talk about 15, 30% of a small investment being consumed by the entrepreneur's time, his most valuable asset, the investor's time, the CPAs, the lawyers, and that becomes a very inefficient process because the next thing that happens is that entrepreneur uses that money to find the talent. A much more direct and frictionless process is for that entrepreneur to find somebody who's passionate and interested in that project or technology, who has a complementary skill set to their own or the existing team, and make that transfer direct right through the entrepreneur to the collaborator, or the investor now becomes the collaborator. And something really interesting happens right then. Once that person makes their investment of intellectual, social, or experiential capital, they're on the same side of the table as the founder. And what are they going to do? They're going to promote that product, and they're going to help find the next person. So now we start this exponential snowball effect of a group that have a common vision, and they're going to profit in the same way because they're all investors, and that technology gets developed at a much faster rate.
Wow. So what does crowdsourcing democratize, or how does crowdsourcing democratize innovation? I mean, you talked about it a little bit earlier, but can you explain that, expand on that a little bit more?
So on in the case of finding human resources to grow a business, it democratizes those small businesses access to these big groups of talent pools. On the funding side, so crowdfunding being one form of crowdsourcing, it enables a business here in Vermont, for example, to get access through the internet to a larger pool of potential investors. And a recent VC report showed several $1 billion of investment coming through California, obviously a lot more people. A lot coming in New York, Austin, Boston, but none of us believe that all the smart people live in those cities. They're all over the United States. Here in Vermont, we had just over $17 million in VC funds flow into the state across, I think, 7 deals. A disproportionately, I guess, small based on the intellectual capital that exists in this state. And part of that is access to that capital. And when you crowdsource and you crowdfund a business from the get-go, you end up with a level playing field. Whether you're sitting in San Francisco or you're sitting here in Burlington, Vermont, you have the access to the same investors. And when the investors see that their deal flow is coming through a very seamless portal, like a crowdsourcing site or a crowdfunding site. When they're drinking their coffee on Sunday morning and looking at deals, it doesn't matter if they're looking in Vermont or San Francisco. With all the media available, they're looking at videos, they're getting to know the founders, they're assessing the teams, they're assessing the technologies, just as they would if the guy from Oakland walked into the VC firm in San Francisco, but the guy's here in Vermont presenting his business. So now we've given the investor access to the founders and the businesses, but crowdfunding in general gets you a much larger pool of investors. So now we're not going to have this lemming effect of the investors all going after the same type of investments. Wearables are hot. Well, are they really hot? What if the crowd validates that they're pulling for a new type of cooler or a new green building technology? Well, those investors, being the crowd, can pull those new technologies into the marketplace, hence democratizing that access to that capital by the founder of the business.
Well, let's take a look at a couple slides. First, the Kickstarter slide. This shows the growth of Kickstarter.
An interesting trend with the advent of crowdfunding. So crowdfunding that a lot of people are familiar with is the Kickstarter, Indiegogo rewards-based model, donation rewards-based model. And it really started 2007-ish with Indiegogo. Kickstarter came in and started kicking some butt, and they took a big part of the market. But most of that market was made up of arts and media type things because people could understand it very easily. In about a 2-year phase shift period, technology, games started to follow those arts projects. And they started chasing the arts projects. And now they're almost catching the arts projects. So the data that we just looked at from MIT is data that's about 1.5 years old. But it shows that those technology businesses are really, really leveraging the power of the crowdfunding to start themselves.
So what do you attribute that to? Just a more educated crowd?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. People are becoming more and more trustworthy of the Kickstarter model. The initial transparency issues, who am I throwing this money at, are being overcome by momentum generated by the initial investors in this case. And the dollar figures are going up and up on the technology businesses. And it's showing this effect of we trust people on the internet now. There are more genuine good people there trying to start businesses than there are scammers trying to take my money. And it's self-validating at this point.
Now, we have a slide on Vermont's crowdfunding, if you want to pull that up, Jim.
I think we touched on that a minute ago.
Yeah, we did, Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's a really exciting place to be for crowdfunding in Vermont. Vermont's ranked number 3 in this jobs assessment that was put out by Crowdfunding Capital Advisors recently.
Nice.
And the different dimensions that go into that assessment are the friendliness to crowdfunding, of course the per capita investment, the number of investments, the size of those investments. And Vermont is at about $17,000 a deal. And they are really focused on disproportionately on food and design relative to the balance of the country, which is exciting. But even more so, we have a very progressive state in terms of their attitude towards crowdfunding. And we've had for a while, in fact, Ben & Jerry's got off the ground this way with the Vermont Small Business Offering Exemption, which is a Rule 147 exemption of the SEC that allows, within the 4 walls of these states, for a business to raise money. And Ben & Jerry's did it very successfully. There's been a lot of businesses that have done that successfully since. And now with the acceptance and understanding of crowdfunding, there will be more and more companies in the state using what we refer to as the VISBO exemption to raise money in the state. And it doesn't go in private networks anymore. It can truly solicit people throughout the entire state when they launch on a crowdfunding platform.
All right, now what about crowdsourcing compared to traditional resource plans? What do traditional resource plans lack?
Yeah, a traditional resource plan has a lot of spool up time. You get people who are there for motivations that are not directly aligned with yours. And when you bring somebody in through a crowdsourcing environment and they potentially have an equity play in that business, they are much more aligned with the founders. They can complement that vision, and then they can go ahead and leverage their networks to bring in more people. Because guess what? A lot of programmers know front-end designers, and a lot of front-end designers know UX UI guys. And if you're developing an app, you're going to need all those people. And you over here with the vision, as a founder of the business, all he had to do is crowdsource that first programmer. And that network now started to spill over because that programmer, once he delivered, is on the same side of the table as the founder.
Okay. Okay. What are the different forms of capital, and how do you deconstruct these into exchangeable forms?
Yeah, this is a tricky concept for a lot of people to get their head around when they're starting a business.
Yeah.
It's the recognition that social capital, for example, has value. And the joke is the black book. How big's your black book, Mr. Salesman? But guess what? That black book has a lot of value. And it may not be a sales black book. It could be resources on how to get things manufactured, for example. When you crowdsource things, you have to articulate exactly what you need, because you're doing an open solicitation. You're not sitting with the person having this discussion. You're openly soliciting a particular task or a particular deliverable. So you have to deconstruct that capital exchange into exactly what it is. This is an intellectual task where we're looking for ideation, for example, on this technological project. And the deliverable out of that is 5 concepts. We will then, as a team, assess those concepts, pick one, and move on to our next task. That's a pretty difficult task relative. You know what? We need a development engineer in a traditional setting. And we bring that person on. We didn't necessarily have to define exactly what they do on the front end. So those different forms of capital have to be understood. They have to be valued. Valuation's a tough thing to do for a startup business. And then they have to be transacted. And a platform will allow you to transact that seamlessly and transparently. So it's not like, hey, Doug, you told me on that napkin when we were at the bar that you were going to give me 5% of your business if I gave you these concepts. You have to actually put a value on it in the front end, document that. If it's an ongoing relationship, typically have a cliff and a vesting schedule. If it's a deliverable, it's a finite equity position in your business, and it could go to nothing and it could explode. But after that, we secure that transaction. It's as secure as a public securities trade.
Now, what can you tell us about IP, intellectual property protection?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a common question that we get about, can I crowdsource this project? Because I have a really good idea, but I can't tell you anything about this. I just can't tell you. And the response is, well, if you can't tell me about that technology you want to work on, you better have all the resources and money to succeed with that project. And most people don't. So you have to release enough to pull people in. So how much is enough? Well, to one person, somebody who's potentially a strategic partner in the same industry as you may release a little bit more because they know what's been done and what hasn't. To an investor who's savvy in that vertical, same amount. To an investor who's looking for a financial play, you need to convince them of the financial play. So now we do that through open solicitation. It becomes a tricky challenge.
Okay.
And a lot of investors right now, you present them with a non-disclosure agreement, and you say, here, sign this, and I'll tell you about my idea. They say, the door's over there. I don't really need to know about your idea. You're here looking to get something from me as much as I want to give something to you.
Okay.
So that IP protection is a tricky thing. And the most important thing to remember is that if I have an idea and I don't tell you, it's just going to remain electrons bouncing around in my brain.
Right, exactly.
And it's never going to do anything.
You have to keep it flowing, keep the ideas going.
Exactly. So there's a balance. There's a balance in all of these things. And we don't need to get into all the different forms of IP protection, but remembering that a patent is only one form. Once you make a public disclosure, you have about a year, you have exactly a year to file that and maintain some type of intellectual property rights on that. You can always maintain trade secrets. And you can limit your public disclosure, which is very counterintuitive to somebody who's crowdsourcing a solution.
Now, final question here, I believe, or we're getting near the end here. How does crowdsourcing innovation promote education?
Yeah, there's been some interesting developments on that. If you think about how students learn in higher education, for example, what are they being trained for? They're being trained to merge into a professional environment and participate effectively in that professional environment. So throw that in reverse and think about the professional environment coming in and merging with the educational environment. The way that we've done that on our platform is we've started a business model competition, technical businesses, open service businesses, capstone engineering projects, to open their doors to crowdsourcing, in many cases in the academic environment, alumni to participate in their project. So they do something very similar to crowdsourcing, where they open their doors and say, here's the project I'm trying to solve. Here's the product I'm trying to develop. We have some good skills here in our engineering, but what we really need is a complementary skill set. And you present this to alumni. They're passionate, they're motivated, they want to help the students. So they jump on board. And what did you just do? You crowdsourced through a motivated group into your team. Now, more importantly, the team now sees how they deal with a professional and how do they contribute to professionals. And when they go to apply to their first job, they can say, hey, look what we did. I successfully contributed to a team and bidirectionally worked with professionals. This wasn't a little academic project.
Right. Well, good. Hey, tell us a little bit about Design Book.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my favorite subject.
Yeah.
Design Book is a platform for crowdfunding and crowdsourcing. First and foremost, there's a index of projects, and they're all started by founders. There's a community of collaborators that all have passions and skills. Design Book merges those two together and presents opportunities from those startup businesses to the community of skilled, passionate people. And they make a very clear and transparent equity exchange. It's equity crowdsourcing.
Great.
That positions the business very nicely for equity crowdfunding, because all the data shows that if you have a diverse set of people on your team and you go up for funding, crowdfunding specifically, you start with a lot of unique edges and you're more successful getting over that transparency hump to follow through with your crowdfunding investment. So we at Design Book facilitate all that, and then we make equity financial transactions. Our on-ramp to this is primarily through business model competitions, Launch VT here, the Peak Pitch, the Motorcycle Roadshow, and then many of the colleges regionally and in the state are using our platform to launch their entrepreneurial students into the startup technology world.
Great. Well, that's about all the time we have, Kyle, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Doug.
Appreciate
It was a lot of fun.
Okay, great. Today's show was Crowdsourcing, bringing together minds and talent to make. For more information about this show, related internet links, and other shows in this series, go to retn.org and look for Makers. Also, for more information on crowdsourcing, go to designbook.com. Thank you for joining us.